demoralization. So our panelists are Dr. Sabia Prince. She's an anthropologist and a longtime Empower DC member. Yes. And one of the things that she recently accomplished is publishing a book called African Americans and Gentrification in Washington, D.C. She's going to speak about that. And then we're going to hear from Detrice Belt. She's the chair of the Berry Farm Tenants and Allies Association. We're going to hear from Ron Hampton. He is the former director of the National Black Police Association, also the Washington representative of Blacks in Law Enforcement, and on the board of the Institute of the Black World in the 21st Century. We're going to hear from Marlise Turner and Shannon Smith. They are DCPS parents and are lead plaintiffs in the lawsuit that challenged the discriminatory closure of public schools. And then we're going to hear from Cortland Malloy, our one friend from the Washington Post. Okay, and we're going to probably keep you to 5 to 7 minutes so that we can, have time for discussion. Sabia, go ahead and get us started.
Okay. Working? Cut me off when you need to.
Yes, and we've had a timekeeper. Are you doing it? Okay.
Okay, super. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here, and this is a topic that is very important to me. I've thought about it a lot and talked a lot about this with other folks. And I've been asked to, as we're all kind of making connections between gentrification and racism, and to be very clear that racism is an issue that, particularly in this city, and as it connects with gentrification, it affects Chinese people, Chinese Americans, it affects Latinos. I'm going to focus my comments on African Americans because that's what I do. That's my field. I study African American life and culture. So that's kind of my departure point. My time is also very limited, but I do want to share some background stuff if I can because racism is, I taught at American University for 12 years. I taught a class called The Roots of Racism, and what I always had to do with that was really define racism. It's a word that people throw around a lot. They throw around accusations of racism, right? You're a racist. No, you're a racist for saying I'm a racist. I mean, you've heard it, right? It kind of goes around like that. So I had a working definition with my students. I would tell them that racism is the unequal distribution of power, privilege, and prestige based on race. Race was created by racism. We are, I'm not going to kumbaya-ish, but we are a part of the human family, and all these various physical differences that you see among us are a product of human adaptation to the environment. So it's human beings that created racial categories and said that people with darker skin are going to be discriminated against, people with lighter skin are prettier, people with red hair are crazy. I mean, this is racism. This is racial, ideology. Another way you can look at it as, racism is discrimination associated with power. So racism it's very important to recognize that you've already heard racism is institutional. It's built into the structure of society. And what that means is that policymakers, executives, police officers who are people of color can enforce racism against other people of color just as effectively as white people. It's about people having power and being in positions of power. That's what really counts. And I'll give you a quick example of that. Back in 2003, the same year when Empower DC was formed, a close friend of our family was an African-American dentist. He was unarmed. He was shot and killed by another police officer, a off-duty police officer. That police officer did not serve any time. He wasn't found guilty of any sort of criminal charge. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? We've heard that. The color of the skin of the police officer is completely irrelevant. It's about the pattern. You don't hear about this happening to white folks. So it's about impact. It's not even about intent. It's about actual impact. You don't hear about white individuals being shot and killed by police officers of color, much less a white professional. So racism is allowed that to happen. And racism is a part of the legacy of white supremacy, and it's also about power and discrimination. And when we connect racism to gentrification, it really is less about hate, which is kind of like an easy go for people want to racism is hate. But this kind of connection is less about hate and more about how centuries of racial inequality have come to impact economic conditions today. So let me quickly define gentrification. I think that's also important because in different locations around the city today, people are actually debating whether or not gentrification is a good or a bad thing. So if you get to the origins of the concept, you can really bypass that entire debate. Because Ruth Glass is the person that coined the term. She was a sociologist doing work in London, England during the 1960s. She coined the term to draw attention to something that was not right, okay? She was witnessing the neglect of urban areas and what happens when that neglect is reversed and resources start getting pumped into the area, and the people that have access to those resources come into the area, and then people who are poor or working class become displaced. All right, that's what gentrification is. As you can hear from this definition, a key component to it is class. But race and class are not strangers to each other. They are cousins. They are intertwined. They're overlapping. And what that means is that gentrification is a process that is affected by class as much as it is affected by racism. And one of the quickest ways you can describe this is to connect it to racism and gentrification to economic factors and how those economic factors overlap with race. And I think some of that has already been done. Teresa kind of did that. But let's go over it a little bit. African Americans have experienced really extensive forms of discrimination that have resulted in wealth and income inequalities. It's also the case that structural and institutional racism have made the road to progress for African Americans and other folk of color much more difficult. And at the same time, it's also given the dominant group unearned privileges. In terms of gentrification, those folks that have wealth and have income, and also they may have connections to other people who have wealth and income. Those are the people who are in a better position to benefit from what is right now one of the hottest real estate markets in the nation. These are the folks who have economic resources to purchase expensive condos or very expensive homes. They have the credit to get the loans. They don't suffer from discrimination when they go for loans, whether it's home improvement, equity loans, whatever the case may be. They have middle-class backgrounds to obtain loans from their parents or their grandparents to start a business or to buy a home. These kind of loans we refer to as intergenerational transfers of wealth. And for very obvious reasons, if you're from a low-income background, you simply don't have access to those important resources. It's also the case that if you earn a low income, you are not going to necessarily be able to, you're spending, number one, a larger percentage of your earnings on housing, and that's going to be a problem with saving money to invest with or to purchase a home. And just really quickly background, Oliver Shapiro wrote a book back in, I think it was 1993, called Black Wealth, White Wealth. If anybody wants to follow up on that. It was a groundbreaking study, and it really kind of laid the groundwork for why African Americans don't have the same wealth as white Americans in this country. And for the reasons that they laid out, black elders will generally not be children or their grandchildren in ways without the history that black folks are able to do. It's certainly the case that individual black folks can do that, but I'm talking large numbers, right? Individual folks, sure, they can do that. And there are other ways in which this plays out, this economic connection and this race gentrification connection, and plays out across D.C. When it comes to elders, when they pass away, elderly homeowners, when they pass away, their children may not have the resources to take on those mortgages and keep the property in the family's hands. When homes fall into disrepair, owners may not have the money to do the needed renovations. This is what we saw when Georgetown was whitened and black folks were gentrified out of that. That was one of the ways in which that occurred in addition to legislation removing people. When an area has been designated historical, homeowners may not have the resources to make the necessary adjustments to adhere to the code enforcement. That's another way in which that occurs. And I have some others, but I'm going to move on because I want to make sure I don't lose time here. So these are economic conditions that overlap with race in the ways that I've already outlined. But let's quickly touch upon how urban areas became neglected in the first place, all right? Some of it's already been detailed, the role of poverty, the lack of resources viewed by racial inequality. But let's also include more active rather than passive forms of racism, such as redlining and blockbusting that was mentioned, the aggressive collaborations between insurance companies and realtors to, in the case of redlining, deny African Americans housing or improvement funds There's also blockbusting, going door to door, in the past, scaring white folks into leaving the city, telling them that the black hordes are coming and motivating them to sell cheap, and really kind of capitalizing on the bigotry that was already there. And then there's also Black Flight, which began after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and the uprisings that those generated. Up until that point, the African American population was increasing very gradually, and I'm not trying to be too simplistic here, but I do want to connect a few dots. And as I wrap up, and then perhaps we can talk about some of this during the discussion session. Dr. King, the so-called dreamer, was actually a radical champion for anti-militarism and for economic justice. And he was vilified by many, and the circumstances of his assassination were quite questionable, as we know. He was an activist because of racism and because of class inequality. He was killed to protect the interests of racism and class inequality. And these are the factors that also fueled the uprisings of 1968, which reflected folks' frustration around class and racism. And, their frustration about the death of their freedom fighter as well. So, this whole black flight piece, after the 1970s census, you see the percentage of black folks begin to decline. And certainly some people have vilified African Americans for leaving the city at that time. I feel blessed that my parents didn't leave. They stayed, but I've gained another perspective on that from doing my research and talking to folks and collecting oral histories with folks, and I found that it really was vulnerability that black folks had that motivated many people to leave. They were vulnerable because they could not protect their assets, they couldn't protect the value of their homes, and they also couldn't sometimes protect their own bodies. And here I'm referring to, doing oral histories with people telling me that how they would call the police to come and they just had a lack of police response, lack of concern. Wrap it up. Okay. Yeah. Around that. So, what does all this mean, for today? It's the very neighborhoods that have experienced the out-migration that are now targeted for gentrification, right? These are where people experience neglect, marginalization, righteous anger, black and white flight, all this race-class drama. These are the sites for gentrification right now. And what kind of baggage do people bring into communities when, that you're grappling with white supremacy and segregation? These things don't evaporate into thin air. People come into neighborhoods that are scary or allegedly scary. People have maps up for other gentrifiers about what areas to avoid, what areas are good or bad, etc. These kind of attitudes, what kind of relationships do you think are established in communities when people come into neighborhoods with these sorts of attitudes? There are plenty of exceptions, and again, we may be able to go into it a little more later, but it's a lot of fear and distrust that I'm talking about here. And so people bring their bigotry, their white privilege, their sense of entitlement into communities, which motivates them to want to change the communities, not adhere to the practices that people have established for decades. Want to bring in more people that look like them so they can be more comfortable. So I'll conclude now by saying that my research and my writing, I link the concepts of gentrification to vulnerability, and race and class have a lot to do with this. Poverty breeds vulnerability, neglect breeds vulnerability, over-incarceration breeds vulnerability. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sabia. You can pass that to Detrice, please. And Detrice is going to give us sort of a personal view on how this stuff is impacting her. Do you want to give us a quick recap of who you are and where you live and what's going on there?
I'm Detrice Belt, and I live in Berry Farms. I've been a resident there for 18 years now, and I'm the chair of the Berry Farms Tenants and Allies Association.
And what's going on with Berry Farm right now?
So now we've been going to hearings for zoning, and going up, speaking to the zoning commission. We were awarded, BFTA was awarded party status, and I was able to cross-examine the developers and the city and ask them tough questions about, what's going to happen to the people in Berry Farms.
And just for people who might not know anything about what the city's planning to do to Berry Farm, what are they planning to do?
They're planning to demolish Berry Farm.
Mm-hmm. How many people live there?
There are 400 plus homes there. It's like 300 families that's that is occupied. It's like 100 that are vacant. So there's a lot of families there.
Do you feel like racism is playing a part in the city's plans to demolish Berry Farm?
Yes.
What makes you feel that way? Is there certain elements of it that you have really seen that, or is it just a gut sense?
Yeah, so now, like, you can see already, like, I see people walking down the street with babies. I guess it's due to maybe the Homeland Security is there. And there's a lot of people working for them. And I see around Berry Farms, maybe like in the Martin Luther King areas, families, white people come and started living there. You see people walking down the street. So I'm just thinking that they want that place and they want white people there.
And are there things about that land area that makes it desirable? Like, what is it
Yeah, it's very accessible to Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. The metro station is there. They have bike lanes already put in place. The highway is there. It's very nice. It's very nice living there.
And they're completing a $20 million recreation center, right? As they're planning to tear down everybody's house,
like a
right?
gymnastic pool and.
So during the process of fighting for your community, can you describe some of the ways you felt discriminated against?
Probably like just, being in the meetings. We have meetings, a lot of meetings in Berry Farms about this redevelopment. And, just to ask them questions in a meeting and how they kind of like just treat you like you don't know anything or, overtalk you and just want to get on with their plans and, just run a meeting. So I feel like it's just like you don't know anything. You're black, whatever. You don't know anything.
When you've met with Councilman Berry or testified before Muriel Bowser, did you feel that were they concerned about the welfare of the black community? And if not, why? I mean, why or why not? What's your perspective? Does Marion Berry care about the black people in Berry Farm?
No, I don't. I really don't. He said out his own mouth when I met with him before that, it needs to go. It's been an eyesore. Berry Farms it's too many people, living in poverty together. It needs to, he said it needs to go. He's been felt like that for years, that Berry Farm should be torn down and get rid of those people. They don't know how to act. And Muriel Bowser, she won't say it right out, but we met with her and spoke with her. She's kind of like talked around the situation back then before she was elected. She was kind of like meeting with us and hoping to get votes and hoping for us to get votes for her, I guess. And so she would talk around the situation of redevelopment and ways that we can work and how we can make it work.
Anything else that you want to add about how you've seen racism, institutionalized racism, play a role in what's going on in Berry Farm? Okay.
It's a fight. It's a big fight for us.
And can you just share, how does it make you feel? Because Detrice is incredible at the zoning commission. I mean, just Skyla and I have at the staff meetings are talking about how you're so much more poised than either one of us would be. We would be screaming and yelling, But this
on the inside.
Yes. So she's got, literally the housing authority with the developer, with, they've got Holland and Knight Law Firm, which is one of the biggest firms in the city working for them. All of them on one side, all in suits. And then you and, Sky just sitting there for support, but you're doing all the talking. And the commissioners are quite rude, in my opinion.
And scary. It's very scary being here and talking, but I feel really good. I want to save my community.
Thank God for you. Detrice, did you notice the other night that Chairman Hood commended everybody but you?
Yeah, no, I didn't know then. But my mother told me, and she said, and I'm kind of in denial, and I do not
It's the chairman of the zoning commission.
I'm already just done with him, so it doesn't really faze me. But my mother said that, and I'm like, really?
He literally praised each person for their role, except for Detrice. Didn't mention her or the tenants and allies. you know, so praise the ANC, even though the ANC, can you share just briefly, what did the ANC admit at the hearing?
She admitted that she went to a closed door meeting with Marion Barry, and at first she was on board. It was a density issue, so the ANC was they had an issue with the density with the redevelopment. So they want 1,100 units. That was the original plan. They want 1,100 units, but the developers they want 1,600 units built in Berry Farms. And so they had a closed door meeting at ANC, Mary Cuthbert and Marion Barry, and Marion Barry convinced her to go ahead and just settle for 1,400 units, even though she was saying at first that she only wanted 1,100 units. So now her stance is 1,400 units, and the developers are pleased with that.
And she said, what Marion Barry wants, Marion Barry gets?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what did she say about her meeting with Todman? Did you catch what she said about that?
She told me that was a private meeting. They had coffee, and that she met with her. She's a friend. That's her longtime friend, and they had coffee, and she gave them our paper because we wanted her to give her the paper on our whole, what was it? The memorandum of understanding for the residents. And she was supposed to have a meeting with her, with everybody in the meeting. So she tells me that she met with her for coffee on a friend type basis, and she gave her the paper, and she'll go over it and get back with us. But we haven't heard anything.
So the ANC literally admitted at this hearing that she met with Adrian Todman, the head of the Housing Authority, and there's a letter that the tenants wanted a written response. And Mary Cuthbert said, well, I told Ms. Todman don't respond in writing. I told her, don't respond. I advised her not to respond to the tenants. So now you have, again, an ANC intervening to protect the development process at the expense of the residents. So.
She basically went back on everything that she was saying before.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ron. So we have just so you know, we have a timekeeper here in the front. She's going to give you a sign at 2 minutes and then at 1. And I'm going to let you just roll unless you, I know Daniel sent you questions, but I think you can roll unless you want me to. Oh, okay. Well, what would you prefer? Would you prefer just to go ahead and say what you were going to, okay, go ahead.
First of all, let me say good afternoon there. It's good to see some people I've been working with Daniel and Jim Powell for some time now, off and on, although I'm not a member or haven't been a member, but I'm going to join now. And I don't bring anything any special other than the fact that I care about these issues. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. Let me share it. Like definition, I believe in definition too. So when I was going to school, going to college, they talked about, it was a more simple definition about prejudice was power equals racism, right? And so then they gave us some examples of that. And so I watched those examples play themselves out in the city. I was born and raised here. Vietnam veteran, came back. Didn't really want to be a police officer, but ended up being a police officer because I had a different vision of what policing was about that took me to police work. And because I was steadfast about that, I finished my career thinking that, and that was fine. But the racism has manifested itself in a lot of different ways, and I just want to share a couple of ways that it has. In education in our city, for example, it is in our education system, but it's also in the criminal justice system because of the school to prison pipeline. If we don't educate them, we represent them to prison. So that's exactly what we do, and the educational system has facilitated the filling up of the jails. And the war on drugs helped that also. I mean, I remember the war on drugs in this city during a particular campaign where we locked up over 53,000 people to show that the police department in the city was doing something about the drug war in Washington, D.C. But when you peel back the thin veneer at the top of those 53,000 arrests, over 2/3 of them didn't have anything to do with drugs. They were like public nuisance crime, urinating in public, drinking in public, those kind of things. But it backed up and messed up the criminal that justice wasn't nowhere in the criminal justice system. In housing, the manifestation of racism in the housing, and it's been around for a long time. When we talk about fathers not being able to stay in apartments with their mothers, if you're a returning citizen, you can't go back to public housing. If you have family, you can only have family that has a criminal justice record. And where people when we come back from being incarcerated, where are family members going to stay? They've been away. We don't have a system here in our city where we have a jail, but we don't have a prison. So if you get sent to California, when you come back home, you want to go back home. But you can't go back home because your family lives in public housing. So that's another way that it manifests itself. I can tell you, living in the city, I remember what 8th Street used to look like many, many years ago, and I loved it. I remember what U Street looked like many years ago. My mother used to take me to the Howard Theater, and I used to be really fascinated with that. 8th Street, 14th Street, it's unbelievable. It doesn't look the same anymore. In some way or another, people want you to believe that all of this progress is good because we're going to benefit from it. But we're not benefiting from it because the simple reason is that they could have did this 30 years ago and we really would have benefited from it because the community of people that I came along with was the ones who suffered through the down period because, it's up and down, up and down. And this wasn't the first gentrification. This was the second gentrification because they came into the city in the mid-80s, fellas, and tried to get a foundation here, but because of the way the police and the drug war was being situated, they didn't stay. They left, went back to Maryland, Virginia, and then when we got those later people like Bentley and Ben Gray, we began to see the doors open up and they started coming in, and the same thing that drew them was the same thing that sent us to Ward 9. We were not benefiting from those kind of things. I lived in the 300 block of Allison Street. I bought my house in 1981, paid $70,000 for my house. Houses in my block were going for $600,000. And the real estate developers are begging you to sell your house. And what we are is cash poor and property rich. But the fact of the matter is, if I sold my house today, I couldn't buy another house on my block.
Yeah.
And it don't make sense. That's how we're being tricked into this thing. And I remember, and I just want to say this. I remember in school we talked about, in the sociology we talked about the criminal justice system. And you all, because of Ferguson, but Ferguson isn't the only example of it. Because this Ferguson has been happening off and on for an awful long time. I can go back to Eleanor Bunkers. I can go back to Amadou Diallo. I can go to the guy that was sodomized in New York City, Anthony Baez. It's a list of them that I can tell you about. But I remember in school they told us that the criminal justice system was the institution of last resort. That meant that all the other institutions in our society were supposed to kick in when it was dark and help us. But that's no longer the case for black and brown people. It's the institution of the criminal justice system. It's the first thing they want you to do. They want to throw out youth in jail. Some years ago they labeled our youth predators and they came back later on research showed that wasn't true, that didn't happen. But we still continue to see these things. And it's happening here in D.C. because they're trying to prepare Washington. And we see it then in the educational system. They want to prepare Washington for the millennium, the new people that are coming here. We didn't leave Washington in 54 or after 54 or after Hobson. We didn't leave Washington. We lived here and went to school here. The whites were the ones who emptied the school system and went to another school system and left the city. And so, but our friends over at UCP, that's what they're doing. They're running this house so that they can compare to Eastern High School, for example. They thought that they were going to fill Eastern High School because whites were going to go to Eastern High School. I don't even believe they got one white there. There's not a white in any of the comprehensive high schools offices. There's none in Baloo, there's none in Anacostia, there's none in Roosevelt, there's none in H.B. Woodson. That's right. McKinney. That's what it is. So it's a new racism. I mean, a new DC, but it's the same old racism.
So we wanted to hear from Marlise and Shannon next, and I know you guys are on opposite ends, so why don't we start with you, Marlise, if you want to use the mic, it's right there. But, do you want me to ask you questions, or you want to free flow? Okay, so first of all, just, can you share with the audience, how did you get involved in this lawsuit? How was your family impacted?
My name is Marlise Turner. My son's name is Ellington Turner. He was a student at McFarland Middle School, which they closed 2 years ago. After the school made great progress with all the children, with their test scores. The test scores were the best of any middle school in the city. The school was still closed. They closed the school down first because of under-enrollment. It was under-enrolled because they turned all the schools around them into pre-K 3 through 8th grade schools. So that affected McFarland. It was the only middle school in Ward 4, traditional middle school in Ward 4.
Do you feel that racism played a role in the closure of McFarland?
Yes, because they were the only children of color in the entire school.
Mm-hmm.
I think there might have been one white student, but he was there for the autism program, because McFarland had a great autism program also.
Mm-hmm. So you went through the lawsuit and the depositions and everything, and the judge has said that although the majority of children affected were children of color, it was not discriminatory. So how do you feel about that?
First off, the judge didn't live in D.C. He didn't have any children going to McFarland, so he was biased to begin with in my eyes. I can't even put into words because I still get upset just talking about it. I think if they tried, DCPS, I know I tried, to put more into this school and the schools that closed, they would have been successful. They really would have been. My son lost out because of that. He really did.
So along those lines, the chancellor said, "Oh, well, we were doing this to improve schools for all the children." Do you feel that black children have benefited at all from the changes?
I can tell you about my son.
Mm-hmm.
He went to Stuart Hobson, Capitol Hill, quote unquote, the best middle school in the city. He failed last year. Failed every damn class.
Wow.
They just failed him, and I know this to be true. If he was able to stay at McFarland with the people who loved him, because the people at Stewart did not love him. They were there just to do a job or get paid. But Mr. Samuels, Mr. Alexander, Dr. Hall, the janitorial staff, everybody loved those children at McFarland, and they took something away from a lot of the children when they closed the school down. They took the love because they cared about him. They cared if he didn't come to school, if he needed extra help, if I needed anything, if he needed anything. They were there for him. I did not get the same thing at Stewart because what they were mainly concerned about at Stewart is networking and raising money and doing whatever they do there, which I wasn't interested in.
So the school boundary plan has come out, and the recommendation includes what?
Reopening McFarland Middle School.
And how does that make you feel?
I'm pissed because, hear me when I say this, everybody, I'm not prejudiced. But, only thing you see on my street right now, because I live at 7 New Barton Street, Northwest Washington, D.C., they're preparing McFarland for up and running within the next couple of years. So when their children are ready to go to sixth grade, McFarland will be up and ready for them. They didn't care about my son, but they care about everybody else's sons or daughters.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to add right now?
I just want, this is my vision. I want all children, whether public, private, charter school, to be able to be on the same playing field here in this city. I want, and I tell everybody this, I want for my son what the president has for his daughters. Nobody, and I teach this to my son right now, whether you're a bum laying in the gutter or the president of the United States, nobody is better than you. Nobody is better than him. That's it.
Thank you. Can you pass that mic down to Shannon in case you don't need it, huh? Okay, all right. All right.
Okay. Well, I'm a coach. I have a cheerleader voice, so I've always been heard because I'm loud.
So
Good
Shannon, go ahead and start. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shannon Smith, and I'm advocate for Wards 7 and 8, and I fight for DC Public Schools. I'm the plaintiff on the case, but I want to touch on two options of what we're talking about. Back in the 70s, I grew up in Simple City. When we were living in Simple City, at that time, we had food stamps that were made out of paper. I'm quite sure a lot of y'all remember that money. There was a lot of that food stamps going around. So I guess whatever mayor that had the city at that time decided, oh, they're feeding these kids a little too much because of a lot of our black kids started being obese. That was one of the first subjects they started talking about in DC public schools. So we were cutting back on the chocolate milk. They started just giving them 1% white milk. Okay, so then they started, because we were living in public housing, I guess our rent had to be $63. My parents wasn't making probably no more than $12,000 anyway a year. So they went up on the rent, so my parents weren't able to pay that rent. So it pushed us out. So my father decided to take a roofing job. So he made a little money and pushed us out to Camp Springs. Started pushing a lot of us out to Maryland. A lot of us got out Maryland and could not survive. So they had Simple City to do what they wanted to do with it. When they realized that a lot of us colored folks was coming out there in Maryland, they didn't like that. So they left Simple City abandoned for that year. So when they found a lot of us being homeless and the shelters started getting full, they reopened Simple City and they allowed us to come back. At that time, Davis Elementary School was a privilege. You had to be an AB student to be in Davis Elementary. If you were found to be under an AB student, you went to Plummer. So that was our prejudice there. A lot of us kids that went to Davis Elementary were light-skinned or white or military. At that time, Plummer Elementary was full of the low-income black, just couldn't do anything for themselves, was full, and they were already walking over top of each other. In the 80s, I became, let's say, a teenager, where I was starting to follow Chuck Brown, and I started having my own mind. I moved to Clifton Terrace. And back in the 80s, when I first got to Clifton Terrace, it wasn't a big drug problem when I first got there. After a while, I noticed all the doors started opening up. And who was the first person on Clifton Terrace that was selling drugs? Was not our color. We had Mexicans coming in, and we had a lot of white people bringing it in. It was the guns. I remember that all too well. Then the crack epidemic came. So they said, okay, they're doing a little too much, and these people are starting to make too much money. Because the people that were making money was our color and moving out into houses and buying houses in Washington, D.C. They didn't like that. So they shut Clifton Terrace down. Along with Clifton Terrace, they were talking about taking down McFarland then and Cardozo. At that time, I was going to Cardozo. We fought to keep Cardozo open. Our band made it so big, they sent us overseas to perform. And they liked us, so we got funds to keep that school open. So they left Clifton Terrace alone. They rebuilt Clifton Terrace and allowed all of our not blacks to come back. Spanish and whites were allowed to come back. Cardozo remained open, but if you look at the school, you notice there's nothing in there but Spanish, Mexicans, and whites. I hate to say it like that, but it is. We have a few color folks in that school right now. when I moved to Ward 8, because I had took over pretty much more than I can handle some of my grandchildren. Lord Jesus. But I raised them through DC Public Schools along with what I was raised through DC Public Schools. And I really enjoyed just visiting the schools at that time. I was able to go in with my children. I was able to make sure their cubbies was taken care of. I was able to sit down and talk with the teachers. We had aides. We were making little things out of macaroni, and we had a lot of arts and crafts. We was doing recess. Within maybe the third, fourth year, I started seeing things taken away. So I went to Mary Berry. I said, Mary Berry, why are they starting to take things out of the school from our kids? Well, the macaroni has so much on it, they can't have that because it might hurt them. You know, now we don't want them going outside because you remember we had merry-go-round. So I said, well, I love the merry-go-round. Why we can't have a merry-go-round? So many kids can get hurt. Okay, isn't that the way that the hospitals and everybody get paid? For real. So somebody got to get hurt. But I'm saying they started taking things away from our black kids that I started seeing, so I started talking. So I applied for a grant to go back to school, and I was denied. And I didn't understand why. So they was like, well, your big mouth, you know, my father was always saying, maybe you need to shut your mouth sometimes. And I kept talking and kept talking and kept talking, and it came about closing all of our schools. So we fought, and I got with DC Empowerment, and we really fought. Winter, spring, summer, fall, rain, whatever, we was out there fighting. And now it's to the point that what we're saying as black people, it don't matter because they're going to say what they want to say. They keep lying to us. They keep taking away from us. Furby Hope Elementary School was closed because they took all of our black kids out of the projects and shut them down and put them in shelters over DC General. So when our kids couldn't make it to school, the enrollment started going down. But our regular kids would come. So you got to think about the kids that live in the neighborhood, they could come. So when they took that school away and put them all in Henley Elementary, they were overcrowded. I had my self-experience was that I put my grandchild down there. They stole her barrettes, they stole her clothes, they beat her up, and pushed us out of there. So everywhere I go, it seems like right now, racism is a real big problem with keeping our schools open. And I'm Shannon Smith, and I'm going to keep fighting until we get these schools back open. Thank you.
Before, Cortland, just one question for Shannon before you. Shannon, for those who don't know, Relisha Rudd went to Furby Hope, and you worked with her as a cheerleading coach, and you knew her. You know, the city just put out a report saying they couldn't have done anything to save Relisha.
That report came out after America Tonight came to Furby Hope and interviewed me. And they asked me what the city said, like you said, the city said they did all they could do. No, they did not. I called Child and Family Service more than 5 times for Relisha Rudd and Irving, her little brother. And they never responded. What they would ask us to do, can we take them so someone can get there? I have had phone calls at 1, 2 o'clock at night from Child and Family Service saying that kids were found at laundromats, and because they would give my name, Relisha would give my name, she knew exactly she would be take care with me. Never did do anything about that. As far as the schools, we only had one school that Relisha was able to come at and be happy with, and that was Furby Hope Elementary. We bought her uniforms, we did her hair. The system failed her all the way around the board. The doctors failed her, the schools failed her, and the city definitely failed her.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I wanted to make sure we were aware of that because, you know, again, it's one of those things where the city rewrites history and says, oh, well, we did everything we could have done, and we know for a fact, you know, that that's not true. So, Cortland, I'm going to let you run with it and close out the panel, and then we're going to open up discussion. Yes.
I'll be very brief. Well, I'm Cortland Malloy. I write for the Post, and I've been in Washington since 1975. And when I came, there was a lot of talk about what's going to be done with the city in the aftermath of the riot. This is 7 years on, and I mean, it was as if, you know, the city had burned 2 years before. Shaw, you know, 8th Street, all scarred. And the master plan, and I don't know why people object to it being called a plan, because it was a master plan, was already in place on the books to do exactly what's happening now. And it wasn't until the Financial Control Board took over the city, and it was really a takeover. 1997, Senator Fairchild, Launch Fairchild of North Carolina, decided to just take all the functions. The first function in 93, whenever 95, was supposed to be to help get the books, financial books, together. But the Republican senator from North Carolina decided that no, we're taking the whole government away, all the operations. But what happened was that a lot of people started getting these contracts to help bring this plan into effect. And people were brought in to run the government. I think Camille Barnett came in at $250,000, started letting contracts to her friends all over the place. Developers started getting special benefits, incentives, and everything. And Anthony Williams started firing people like crazy. And before you know it, the books were balanced. And ever since then, this has been running for balanced. In fact, the thing is, the place is flush with cash. And what happens when a place gets flushed with cash? People with cash make more cash, and the people without it. So we have now a city with one of the highest income gaps any place in the country right now. And what you're seeing, really, to me, is a system that is working the way it was supposed to work. I'm from Louisiana, and growing up in the 50s, we had elders in the family who knew people who had been slaves. Like, I had aunts who lived to be 106 years old and stuff like that. And they knew slaves when they were growing up. And they traced family histories all the way back to Remus and Romulus were the two brothers that came to Virginia that ended up going to being sent. The bad one was sent to Mississippi. I'm from the bad one. But no, you could trace the line. And what it let me know was, for most of the history, but 90% of the time this country has been here, the whole thing has been about legalized, institutionalized racism. I mean, it is so deeply enrooted. I mean, and when you hear him talk about what slavery, the intent of slavery, it was silence, to make people not want to speak up, to turn human beings into chattel, and make them obedient. Make sure that they never wanted to read. So the point being that here we are, just out of it, in the blip of an eye. I mean, I grew up in segregation. I graduated from a segregated high school in 68. And the schools never really changed. My school is still segregated to this day, never changed. So the point is that for most of it, 90% of the time this country has been here. This is what it's been about legally. And what you're seeing now is just a done deal. We're in a place now where communities used to be before they built. People from Virginia needed to get in town a little quicker, so they just tore all this down and built their Southeast Freeway. And they're doing the same thing now for the convenience of others. People want to, it's the same thing. Okay, so you all did really good at the zoning hearing. But let me give the zoning commission, and I'll be brief, really brief. Please make this brief. The zoning commission, if they went and petitioned, operates by the same rules that it did when it was founded, adopted by act of Congress in 1938. it's basically a quasi-federal branch. It does not answer to anybody. It is one of the most powerful entities in the city because this is where land use is determined and land is everything. So they go before this group to petition, and you have the same people. Adrian Finch wanted 3 developers on the thing, but, you know, that was just too obvious. But now they have people who are basically who could put the plan in action, you know, as running the office of planning for the city, being part of the park service. And the job of the zoning commission is a police function. It is to protect the value of property and make sure that everything is environmentally nice, height restrictions and all that stuff. But they want this thing to have value. So you have efforts underway now to make Berry Farm a valuable place, not the people, it's to make it a place. There's a thing called the overlay. You can look at it on the Office of Planning website or the Zoning Commission. It's an overlay of what the purpose of the development will be, and they want to make that an entertainment area. You know, with some nice little, I forget what it's called, little walk. I have nothing against walkable spaces and biking, bike trails, but this is about that sports arena. They want that. They want to put a sports arena over there, and all the amenities that can make it a fun place to be right on that highway. And when you hear the architects talk about what they're going to do with Berry Farm, one guy slipped and said, and this is the kind of place we think it ought to be for the next generation of residents. They just said it straight up. So, and there's no sense of people. It's all about the thing, the property. You know, they talk all about everything. And when people say, well, wait a minute, we grow gardens to feed so we have our back spaces where we can entertain guests and have people come over. And it didn't even register. They went right on to the AMI of the neighborhood, says it will support, X number of dollars. Racism, to acknowledge the presence, the existence of racism is such a powerful thing that it is equivalent of a fish one day saying, wait a minute, I'm in water? This is what, except that racism is not good. But the awareness, we are so immersed in it that it is a big enough thing right now to acknowledge it and to speak out. Speak out on it. And that's the way that's the only way that it's gonna be dealt with. People have to deal with it where they are. Berry Farm, in the newspaper, there is no place. One last thing, if you look at the city, why is there a Ward 3 and a Ward 8 with this complexity like it is? How can these disparate numbers continue in perpetuity forever and ever? The black unemployment rate, the black income rate is always this low compared to that, and it's always like that. That is the evidence of a structure that seeks to perpetuate itself. And you say, well, what about the black middle class? Well, they got nice paychecks, but those people up in the district building are very nervous. They are very nervous. They want to be. They got to figure out who can I be with that's going to help me keep this check, because they don't have any wealth. There is no wealth for them to fall back on. Nobody's going to get. They're going to have to take a subprime loan too. This thing is deep. But when you think about it's been rooted for 450 years, and the civil rights legislation, this law thing wasn't passed until the 60s. And again, people ignored that to a large extent. Understand what we're dealing with. The founding principle of the country is racism, is white supremacy, and black service to that interest. You got the wealthiest group of black people in this country are entertainers. You're right. and they are owned. They are owned. Okay, thank you.